Ruth Ellen Shelton was born on December 19, 1960. She was 17 years old at the time of her death. According to her family, Ruth was known for her intelligence, discipline, and determination. She was an honor roll student who took her education seriously and consistently demonstrated strong academic ability. Her family described her as driven, with clear goals for her future and a willingness to work toward them. Ruth had a strong interest in computers and technology at a time when the field was still developing. She hoped to become a computer scientist and was already taking steps toward that goal while still in high school. She was attending what is now the University of Indianapolis to earn early college credits, an opportunity that reflected both her academic performance and her ambition. Balancing high school coursework with college-level classes required commitment and maturity, qualities that her family believed defined her character. Outside of academics, Ruth was involved in music and her church community. She was a member of the West Side Church of the Nazarene Choral Group, where she participated regularly. Music was an important part of her life and allowed her to connect with others in her community. Her involvement in the choir reflected her willingness to contribute her time and talents beyond school. This section establishes Ruth Ellen Shelton as a student, a church member, and a young person with aspirations for the future. Before the events that ended her life, she was defined by her achievements, interests, and plans, not by the crime that would later bring her name into public record. Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. Your support helps us bring you more stories like this. Now, let us begin. Burger Chef Restaurant was located at 5725 Crawfordsville Road in Speedway, Indiana. In 1978, it functioned as a typical fast food establishment, staffed largely by young employees who worked evening and weekend shifts. For many teenagers, the restaurant represented one of their first formal workplaces, offering part-time employment and responsibility. On the night of November 17, 1978, 4 employees were assigned to work the closing shift. The assistant manager on duty was Jane Freet, age 20. Also working that night were Daniel Davis, age 16, Mark Flemons, age 16, and Ruth Ellen Shelton, age 17. Each employee had specific closing duties, including cleaning the restaurant, securing the safe, and preparing the building for reopening the next day. Mark Flemons had not originally been scheduled to work that evening. Another employee, Brian Crane, was supposed to be part of the closing shift, but Mark agreed to cover his hours. This change placed Mark at the restaurant that night unexpectedly. Brian later stated that he stopped by the restaurant after closing and discovered that no one was there. The Burger Chef was an ordinary workplace, and the employees were carrying out routine responsibilities. Nothing about the environment or staffing suggested that the events of that night would end in violence. On Friday, November 17, 1978, the Burger Chef in Speedway closed at approximately 11 p.m. Sometime between 11:45 p.m. and midnight, unknown individuals entered the restaurant. During this period, Ruth Ellen Shelton, Jane Freet, Daniel Davis, and Mark Flemons disappeared from the building. Investigators later determined that the 4 employees had been abducted from the restaurant during the closing process. Brian Crane, who had been scheduled to work that shift before Mark Flemons covered for him, stopped by the restaurant around midnight. When he arrived, he noticed that the building was empty. None of his co-workers were present, and there was no explanation for their absence. Inside, the register had been left open, the safe was also open, and the back door of the restaurant was ajar. It was later discovered that approximately $580 was missing from the register and safe. However, more than $100 in coins had been left behind. The purses and jackets belonging to the missing employees were still inside the restaurant, suggesting they had not voluntarily left for the evening. 2 empty currency bags and an empty roll of adhesive tape were found near the open safe. Brian contacted the police to report what he had found. At the time, there were no visible signs of a struggle inside the restaurant. Based on the limited information available that night, the disappearance was not immediately treated as a serious crime. The absence of the 4 employees remained unexplained, and no immediate search was initiated. When police were first contacted about the missing employees, the situation was not treated as an emergency. Officers initially believed the four workers may have taken money from the safe and left together. The incident was viewed as a possible case of teenagers skipping work or engaging in a minor theft. Because of this assumption, the restaurant was not secured as a crime scene. No photographs were taken inside the burger chef before it was cleaned. Employees were allowed to enter the building, remove items, and prepare the restaurant for reopening. By early Saturday morning, the location had been cleared and returned to normal operations. Any potential physical evidence that may have been present was lost during this process. Speedway police officer Buddy Ellwanger was later assigned to the case. He would eventually acknowledge that mistakes were made from the beginning. He stated that the failure to preserve the scene and document it properly eliminated valuable evidence that could have assisted investigators. Without photographs or collected materials, law enforcement had little to work with once the seriousness of the situation became clear. At the time, management reported that only about $580 was missing, which reinforced the belief that the incident was not violent. The lack of visible damage or struggle inside the restaurant further contributed to this conclusion. These early decisions significantly impacted the investigation. By the time authorities recognized the disappearance as a possible kidnapping, the opportunity to gather critical forensic evidence from the restaurant had already passed. Concern increased when the four employees failed to return home or make contact with their families the following morning. As hours passed with no explanation, the assumption that the workers had simply left together began to weaken. Additional information soon prompted authorities to reconsider the initial assessment. Jane Freet's Chevrolet Vega was found partially locked in town, separate from the restaurant. The discovery of her vehicle suggested that the employees had not willingly abandoned their responsibilities or left the area together. Combined with the personal belongings still inside the burger chef, this raised further questions about what had happened during the closing shift. Investigators began to view the situation as a robbery kidnapping rather than a petty theft. It became increasingly evident that the four employees had been taken against their will. Authorities theorized that the abduction may have occurred while the workers were taking trash out the back door, a routine task that could have made them vulnerable. The realization that the employees had likely been kidnapped marked a turning point in the case. Law enforcement began to search for the missing teenagers and their manager, but crucial time had already been lost. The lack of preserved evidence from the restaurant limited the scope of the investigation. Despite growing concern, there were still no confirmed leads on the whereabouts of the four employees as the weekend progressed. On Sunday afternoon, November 19, 1978, hikers discovered the bodies of four young people in a wooded area of Johnson County, more than 20 miles from the Burger Chef restaurant in Speedway. The victims were identified as Ruth Ellen Shelton, Jane Freet, Daniel Davis, and Mark Flemons. All four were still wearing their Burger Chef uniforms. An examination of the bodies revealed that each victim had been killed in a different manner. Ruth Ellen Shelton and Daniel Davis had been shot multiple times with a .38 caliber firearm. Their wounds indicated execution-style shootings. Jane Freet had been stabbed twice in the chest. The handle of the knife used in the attack had broken off and was missing, though the blade was later recovered during an autopsy. Mark Flemons had suffered blunt force trauma and died from asphyxiation. Investigators later determined that he had been bludgeoned, possibly with a chain, and had choked on his own blood. His injuries differed significantly from those of the other victims. Money and watches were found on the bodies, suggesting that robbery may not have been the sole motive for the murders. The presence of personal valuables contradicted the idea that the killings were committed purely for financial gain. The discovery confirmed that the four employees had been abducted and murdered after leaving the restaurant. The scene in Johnson County marked the transition of the case from a missing persons investigation to a confirmed multiple homicide. The brutality and varied methods of killing added further complexity to an already compromised investigation. On the night of the murders, a 16-year-old eyewitness reported seeing two suspicious men sitting in a car outside the Burger Chef shortly before closing. Both men were described as white and appearing to be in their 30s. One man had a beard, while the other was clean-shaven with light-colored hair. Based on this account, police created clay models of the suspects to assist with the investigation. Later in 1978, a man in a Greenwood bar claimed he had been involved in the murders. Police questioned him, but he passed a polygraph examination and denied responsibility. He provided the names of individuals he alleged were part of a fast food robbery gang. Investigators followed these leads, but were unable to establish direct connections to the Burger Chef murders. One suspect, who resembled the bearded composite, shaved his beard shortly before a scheduled lineup. Another individual, named by the Greenwood suspect, was later imprisoned for armed robbery, as was a third associate who fit the description of the fair-haired man. Despite these developments, no physical evidence linked any of these individuals to the killings. Authorities offered plea deals to suspects not believed to have committed the murders directly, but no confessions were obtained. Without physical evidence or reliable testimony, prosecutors could not file charges. The investigation continued, but early suspect leads failed to produce arrests related to the murders themselves. In 1984, Detective Mel Wilsey of the Marion County Sheriff's Department received a call from Donald Forrester, an inmate at Pendleton Correctional Facility. Forrester claimed he had been involved in the Burger Chef murders and was willing to confess to avoid being transferred to a more violent prison. A court order allowed Wilsey to bring him to Marion County for questioning. During his confession, Forrester stated that he had shot Daniel Davis and Ruth Ellen Shelton. He accurately led police to the wooded crime scene and described the positions of the bodies as they were found. He also knew about the broken knife handle used in Jane Freet's murder, a detail that had not been widely released to the public. Forrester claimed the motive involved a drug debt allegedly owed by Jane Freet's brother. According to his account, he and 3 associates went to the restaurant to threaten Jane. When Mark Flemons intervened, a fight occurred, resulting in Flemons falling and hitting his head. Forrester stated that the group then decided to abduct and kill all 4 employees to eliminate witnesses. He led police to a river where he claimed to have discarded the gun, but it was never recovered. His ex-wife later told investigators that he had retrieved shell casings after the murders and flushed them down a toilet. A search of the home's septic tank uncovered spent .38 caliber shell casings. After details of his cooperation were leaked, Forrester recanted his confession, claiming it had been coerced. Without the murder weapon or further cooperation, charges were never filed. Forrester died in prison from cancer in 2006. Despite thousands of investigative hours, the murders of Ruth Ellen Shelton, Jane Freet, Daniel Davis, and Mark Flemons have never been officially solved. Burger Chef offered a reward of $25,000 for information leading to the capture of those responsible, but no successful prosecutions followed. While investigators believed they had identified possible perpetrators, the absence of physical evidence prevented charges. Over the years, law enforcement pursued leads across several states, including Ohio, Illinois, Wisconsin, and Texas. Key pieces of evidence, including the firearm, the knife handle, and the chain believed to have been used, were never recovered. No surviving suspects provided confessions that could withstand legal scrutiny. The Indiana State Police continue to keep the case open. Advances in DNA analysis have reportedly been explored, though no public breakthroughs have been announced. The early handling of the crime scene remains a critical factor in why the case could not be resolved. More than 4 decades later, the Burger Chef murders remain one of Indiana's most well-known unsolved crimes. The case stands as a reminder of 4 young lives lost and an investigation shaped by early missteps. Despite continued efforts, justice for the victims has yet to be achieved.